Gangsters, cops, and politicians, get ready to rock on a mission. Each one of us shares our own vision. When I was on the yard, I went real hard. While I patrolled the streets, all the G's I meet. When I was on the yard, I went real hard. While I patrolled the streets, all the G's I meet. While I pulled the boat, got to stay woke. I like to thank God above. I like to thank God above. God above. I like to thank God above. God above. I like to thank God above. God above.
This is your host, Gabe Morales. I am over 60 years old now and grew up around gangs all of my life. As I've relayed in the Black Gorilla family video, I met my first Crip in 1974. We had moved up to Seattle. This was 5 years after the gang started in LA, and I've spoken to many Crips and Bloods who were there in the early days, and their version of history does not match up to many other stories I've heard, especially from youngsters. I just don't take one person's word. I've done thousands of hours of research on this and spoken to hundreds of gang members. For instance, former Black Liberation Army member Clark Squire, aka Sundiata Alcali, who was sentenced in 1974 for murdering a New Jersey state trooper, claims that Apprentice Bunchy Carter and Raymond Washington, both leaders of street organizations, were very much attracted to the Black Panthers. It is true Bunchy was a leader of the Black Panther Party in Los Angeles, but there is zero proof Raymond was ever associated with the Panthers. According to Acoli, Crip members originally identified as being community relations for an independent people or community revolution in progress, or CRIP, a community helping association. Many gang researchers and practitioners, including me, disagree with claims that the Crips were started as a benevolence organization to help Black people. This conclusion is backed up by many retired cops who actually worked them back in the day, including Zach Fortier, a police officer for over 30 years, who interviewed Raymond Washington's own brother about roots of the Crips gang history. Also, there's no documentation of a Black Panther connection to Raymond in any newspapers or FBI files that I've researched. And you know that J. Edgar Hoover and his G-men were watching everybody at the time. Also, many Crip OGs still alive today to deny this characterization on camera and tell stories of being straight gangsters. They're involved in very little political activity other than resisting police arrest. In all of my years, I have not seen one picture of Crip founder Raymond Washington with the Black Panther t-shirt or Black Power symbols on him, or attending any major political rallies for Black social causes in the 1970s, as many other Black men, like Jonathan Jackson, pictured here with longtime activist Angela Davis did. With changes in older Black leadership, infiltration by government authorities, and adverse impact on Black organizations and resources, young Crips shifted to more self-centered activities, such as drug distribution, robbery, and weapons trafficking. As covered in the BGF video, Bunchy Carter is a different case. He was a gang member in the Slauson Renegades, an organization that predated both Crips and Bloods by many years. According to retired members, the Slausons started in 1952 and they were defunct by 1965, according to gang researcher Alex Alonso. Carter was killed in 1969, and there is no hard law enforcement documentation or anywhere else that he was ever a Crip. Raymond Washington, the sole Crip founder, organized the Crips in 1969 at the age of 15 and was much younger than Carter, who was 36 years old when he died. Black leather jackets were one of the most prized possessions for many Black youth all across America, not just in LA. According to many of the early Crip members and members of their rivals, the Bloods and Pyrus, Crips were just common thugs and could care less about bringing unity to the community unless it was unity underneath their flag. Crips mostly preyed on and beat up other blacks, something the Panthers were strongly against. According to the Panthers I knew, the worst thing you could do in the late 60s and 70s was kill another black man. As I alluded to, it is true the Crips and other black gangs filled the void for disillusioned black youth after many of the Panthers were killed or locked up in the early 70s. Like I said, I have done a lot of my own research and conducted interviews with elder Crips and Bloods, but I must give recognition here to Kev Mack Videos for interviewing many of the sources cited in this video, as well as other individuals such as Skip Townsend, who also documents gangs. The following information on early events and formation of the Crips and Bloods was confirmed from numerous Triple OGs, the original gangsters of these sets. From the early 1970s, as many of the founding members I spoke to at Folsom Prison in the 1980s or at the King County Jail in Seattle, Washington in the 1990s. When I was growing up in the 1970s, even in Seattle, it was very common for many guys to refer to their homes as their crib. Some people claim that Washington carried around a picture of a baby crib in his wallet, and they were first known as the Crips, but later decided to call the gang the Crips. How silly does that sound? Some say local newspapers in the early 1970s misspelled crib as Crip, but Kev Mack has documented in his videos that the Crips name was used in the press before these individuals say it was misstated. Others say the name came from the comic book, Tales from the Crypt, but there's little evidence of this either. The most likely reason for the gang's name was the way they walked, which was a diddy-bop strut, as if being crippled. Also, prior to the formation of the Crips, it was common for blacks who were close to call each other cuz, which was slang for cousin, whether or not they were actually related. Once the Pyrus and other gangs started to have squabbles with the Crips, they stopped using that term, which had become associated with the dominant Crips. Pyrus called each other Pyrus, Brims called each other Brims, until there was a Pyru alliance in the 1970s. Prior to this alliance, "What's up, blood?" was a common term used by blacks coming back from Vietnam. It had no gang meaning until the 1970s when it was adopted by the Bloods. Late 1960s, the original Avenues member and professional bodybuilder Craig Munson claims he came up with the term Crip. Munson says that then 15-year-old Raymond Washington and his homeboy, Bernie Ray Bulldog Simpson, were too little to join the Avenues. Munson admits some people did call Washington and Simpson Baby Avenues, a group that did not officially exist, but they were called that because they often tried to hang around the older Avenues. One day, Munson said he was fed up with Raymond's mouth and backhanded him. Munson felt Washington was being disrespected while the Avenues were lifting weights at Munson's place. He told Raymond, "Don't you come over here no more." Raymond, with pride hurt, allegedly told the 19-year-old Munson, "Good, I don't want to be in the Avenues anyway. I'm going to start my own gang." Munson mocked him and said, "Oh yeah? What you going to call it? The Crips?" Munson states Raymond said, "Yeah, that's what I'm going to call it." And so he did. Whether true or an exaggeration, many say Raymond copied the Diddy Bop of his half-brother Gerard, as told in the book, I Am Raymond Washington. According to Gerard, he walks with a limp, an exaggerated gait due to bad ankles. Still, others like A.C. Moses, a.k.a. King Babalooey, a very early Crip who switched affiliation to Pyrus, says the young Crips imitated a popular guy in the neighborhood, Victor Adams, who walked with a limp as if crippled. I never spoke with Raymond Washington, but it's obvious to me he became bigger than life. Per early 1970 gang member Jimmy Lavender, author of Bitter Rain and A Better Tomorrow, Raymond was simply a bully, not a revolutionary for unity in the community. Per Crip OG Cutes, Raymond was not a bully, and many people say Lavender was just a hater. Yet, Cute says that Raymond was always in fights, and he always won. He also says they were always taking jackets off of other kids, which sounds like they were bullies to me. People who knew him admit Raymond was kicked out of a lot of schools for fighting mischief. He went to Drew Junior High School, then Edison Junior High School, then first attended Fremont High School in 1969. His best friend, Bulldog Simpson, went to Bethune Junior High and also went to Fremont. Bulldog was the first documented West Side Crip. Raymond then transferred to Washington High School in September 1970, where he first met Stanley Tukey Williams, who ran with a gang called the Al Capones. Some have stated that Tukey was with the Gladiators, but this was likely a description of the way he fought, not the actual gang. Some say OG Wolf from the Brims tried to recruit Tukey first. Either way, it's impossible that Williams was the original Crip in 1969. According to my sources, a 17-year-old Tookie was recruited in the gang after the summer of 1971. Some say he met Raymond at the Rio movie theater, but early Crip OG Angelo Barefooted Pookie White says Tookie was locked up when they went to the movies. Some sources say Tookie's incarceration at this time was due to fighting some rebel rousers. Others say it was due to car thefts in 1969. To be honest, I am not sure. It could have been due to both. In summer of 1971, Raymond held a meeting on the west side of South Central at Washington High School after a conflict occurred with some Inglewood boys in June of that year. At that meeting, Raymond asked the West Side Crips to choose a leader, and they voted Larry Sapaggio, then 18, to call the shots, not Williams. This incident was said to be the start of the West Side Crips, when pre-Crips, SMAC's gang members, including Melvin Hardy, who's their number one guy, Mike and Louis Concepcion, Warlock, Archie Crum, Big Oldie, the Runettes, and Barefooted Pookie, then 14 years old, decided to become Crip. According to Pookie, Donald Sweetback Archie was close to Tookie, but neither one of them were present at the first West Side meeting to discuss the incident with the Inglewood boys. No Inglewood Crips were present at that meeting either, but Inglewood gangsters Mike Christian, Kenny Robinson, Leon Touche Watkins, and others later decided to join the Crips after their meeting with Raymond. Per LA County Sheriff's Department Sergeant Richard Valdemar, who was assigned to gang units in the 1970s and who has appeared in many gang documentaries, Tookie Williams was not the co-founder of the Crips, but he was a very early member of the Crips. There's a difference. According to those who knew him, Tookie came from the West Side Hundreds and became a Crip. Tookie did time in and out of Bob Simmons' homes for boys from 1974 to 1977, so he missed a lot of the action on the streets. On weekend leave, though, Tookie did spend a lot of time in Compton with Crip homeboys who visited him. Multiple Triple OG interviews indicate the SMACs, Inglewood boys, and Al Capones all disbanded, and many of their members became West Side Crips under the leadership of original East Side Crip Raymond Washington. According to most Crips that were around in the early 1970s in South Central, Raymond was a natural organizer and maybe still feeling the sting of Munson's backhand and promised to build up his own gang. He held mandatory meetings on the weekends to discuss repping at social events or discuss beefs with rivals that the Crips might have. He was also known for cruising around South Central and Compton in his white 1962 Chevy during his recruitment efforts when starting all of the OG Crip sets. During one of his meetings down in Compton, Washington recruited Mac Thomas, who died on September 21st, 1978, Head Honcho, Joseph Salty LeBlanc, deceased, Robert Sugar Bear Jackson, Vamp, and Woody Rat, all from the Grandee area in Compton, to join his fast-growing organization. St. Andrews Park, the 100s, the 80s, and the 60s, all united as Eastside Crips after reading the Crip Construction and the Crip Conglomeration, also known as the Crip Multiplication Manifesto, written by Washington. Besides Pookie and Tookie, Big Bob Hop Creer, Curtis Buddha Morrow, Thomas Elvis, Melvin Hardy, Erskine Mad Dog Jones, Ricardo Bub Sims, Bogart, Whack, James Cuz Cunningham, and Judson Bascott were early influential West Side Crips. After doing some time, Bascott wrote The Evolution of America's Terrorists and was involved in the very first documented Crip incident that was published and talked about all over LA. The famous Palladium incident happened on March 20th, 1972, after a Soul Train show featuring Curtis Mayfield and Wilson Pickett. A Crip named James Cuz Cunningham, age 19, saw a boy with a nice leather coat, referred to as a maxi coat, because of the way it draped down almost to the ankles. Cunningham told his crime partner, 22-year-old Judson Bascott, "I want that coat." Cunningham and Bascott crossed Sunset Boulevard just east of Vine Street and focused their attention on 16-year-old Charles Foster and one of his friends, Robert Ballou Jr., who was slightly ahead of Foster. Bascott pulled out a Smith & Wesson .22 and told Foster to remove his coat with the words, "This is a robbery. Don't make it a homicide." Bascott did not fire his weapon, but the coroner determined that Robert Ballou died as a result of a beating with fist blows and feet stomps. Tookie Williams, like many youth of his era, liked to wear slingshot t-shirts to show off his muscles. If it was cool outside, he and his homeboys would wear a long trench coat. Cuffed blue Levi jeans and Converse high-top tennis shoes were also the style of the day. In addition to trench coats, they'd sometimes wear leather coats taken off of a victim, and they would like to wear large-brimmed hats. According to several witnesses who knew Tookie back in the day, one of his favorite sayings was "Crip or what?" If the victim answered in the affirmative with a "hell yeah, cuz," or something to that effect, he was left alone and considered an ally after he survived further prodding. If the answer was a blank stare or anything considered a no, he was beaten. Often Crips wore an earring in their ear, gangster hats, as previously described, or hair nuts if their head wasn't shaved bald. Sometimes they carried canes, which made them look cool, but also could be used as weapons. Eventually, wearing trench coats changed over the years to members-only jackets, with one glove worn if clubbing at night. This was usually worn on their gun shooting hand to leave no prints. During the day, they often wore Pendleton shirts like Mexican gangs did. Levi's were often replaced with blue or beige khaki pants, also imitating the Mexican cholos. Lokes, as dark sunglasses were called, was a derivative of the Spanish word loco. Converse might still be worn, or if poor, wino shoes, which were slightly more affordable at the local Kmart. Many Triple OGs note that hundreds of Crips in the early 1970s would converge on downtown LA wearing these hairstyles in one earring until the movie Coolie High came out. They started wearing do-rags like many blacks did in Chicago. While Compton was the birthplace of the anti-Crip Pyrus gang, after 1972, the city also had a lot of Crip sets. Kelly Park, Acacia Block, Nutty, Front Hood, Palmer Block, and Park Village Compton Crips. The CC Riders, or Compton Crip Alliance, was allegedly started in 1986 by Frederick Baby Gangster Staves from Santana Block. The CC Riders were close to Watts Crips, so they're often called Hub and Dub. The East Coast Crips are one of the largest Crip sets today, and they were started in Raymond's area of control. One of the first East Coast was Greg Batman Davis. They consist of many different factions. I dealt with many East Coast Crips at Folsom Prison, including the buffed out Buster Shelton, Bird Cash, Mel Rock Bryant, and Capone Floyd, whose older brother was one of the original East Coast Crips. The East Coast are usually allies of the Rolling Old Crips and feud with the 8-Tray Gangsters, Broadway Mafias, and Kitchen Crips, as well as Grape Street. They also beef with Pueblo Bishops, Mad Swans, Bebops, and Brims. East Coast Crip member, then 35-year-old John Christopher Blaylock, killed a California Institution for Men at Chino prison officer named Manuel Gonzalez in January 2005. The East Coast Crips had a long war with Florencia 13 over an alleged dope rip of several kilos, but recent peace talks seem to have worked things out via the Castellano brothers and East Coast Crip shot callers. 8-Tray Gangsters were primarily located on the west side of South Central LA. They were involved in the epicenter of the 1992 Rodney King riots when 8-Tray gang members stole some beer from a store at the corner of Florence and Normandy. About the same time, the news came on clearing LAPD officers of any wrongdoing during the beating of Rodney King. Police were called to the scene but let the beer rippers free, which empowered the crowd, and they began to riot, including Damian Football Williams, an 8-Tray gangster. The media discovered the disturbance, and soon the rioting spread to other parts of the city. Football Williams then threw a brick very hard at the head of an 18-wheel truck driver named Reginald Denny, who had stopped at the intersection right after LAPD vacated the area. This was all caught on camera as Football celebrated the crime. 53 people died and hundreds more were injured, and over $1 billion of damage was caused during the riot. A well-publicized peace treaty with backing from activists was very short-lived and very self-serving for the most part. As when they first started, the Crips and Bloods did not really care about serving the community. They just started victimizing more people outside of their hoods who often were not gang affiliated. The gang culture has since been glamorized and romanticized more than ever as the gang spread. Cody Monster Scott joined the gang in the 1970s as a young man. In his book, Scott talks about the bitter rivalry between his gang and the Rolling 60s. The 8-Tray Gangsters and Rolling 60s started a war over a girl at a party. On December 31st, 1980, New Year's Eve, 8-Tray Gangsters broke into a gun store on Hawthorne Boulevard. Monster Cody was later ambushed by the Rolling 60s and was hit 5 times. Later that night, Monster's little brother Kearshawn Little Monster Scott planned to hit the shooters in retaliation, but could not find them. So they fired on a Rolling 60s party, killing one individual and injuring another. He served almost 16 years for the offense. By 1980, gang homicides had reached 355 in LA County. It was out of control. Grape Street Watts Crips are located within the old Jordan Downs housing project on the east side of Watts. Grape Street members were often identified with the color purple. Their allies are A-Tray gangsters, Rolling 30s, and Compton Crips. Their enemies are most Blood and Pyru sets, but also East Coast Crips, Fudgetown Mafia, and Rolling 60s. The Kitchen Crips have two main factions, the 8-7 Kitchens and the 116 set. The Hill and Lee families were OG Kitchen Crips in 1973. Kitchen Crips had an early beef with the Bishops at a dance in the early days. I dealt with many Kitchen Crips in Seattle also, who came up during the 1980s and 90s. They will often wear Kansas City Royals logo blue hats. Their allies are most Gangster Crip sets, Avalons, Broadways, Main Street Mafia, Hoover Criminals, and Fudgetown Crips. They often beef with East Coast Crips and Bloods. The Rolling 30s were originally called the Harlem Godfathers. They had some Belizean members as founders, so they can be found active today down in Belize due to deportations. They later called themselves Rolling 30s Harlem Crips and had guys like James Miller, the Brim Killer, who was a good football player and is pictured here on the left in prison, as well as Raymond Ashby, pictured here on the right. They are broken down into subsets, such as 35th, 37th, and 39th. Their trip runs from Jefferson to MLK between Crenshaw and Normandy. Rapper Emrius Nipsey Hussle Asghedom was a rich Rolling 60s neighborhood Crip that many respected for going into business and pumping dollars into the local economy. On March 31st, 2019, Nipsey Hussle was fatally shot outside one of his stores in South Los Angeles. Eric Holder, a 29-year-old man who had confronted Nipsey earlier that day, was arrested and charged with murder a few days later. Rolling 60s often sport Seattle Mariners hats for the S for 60s and for the O where the baseball is, and because it is blue. Rolling 60s often rival with Grape Street Crips. Rolling 90s are also a big set, located on the west side of South Central LA. They are based north of Century Boulevard near Jesse Owens Park, formerly named Sportsman's Park. The Rolling O's are often rival with A-Tray gangsters and Hoover Criminals. The Hoovers are a very interesting gang. I know these guys like the back of my hand. I had many of the early Hoovers at Folsom with B and C numbers, such as Doc McAfee, Big Murph Murphy, Big D Moore, Bobo Crama, G. Evans, and Pup Baines, as well as Five Deuce Hoover Tony Stacy, who was a member of the Consolidated Crip organization. By the late 1980s, Hoovers mostly claimed criminals in LA, except for the Five Deuce set. I will do a video focusing solely on Hoovers in the near future, and also covering them in a segment on Northwest gangs, where they have a big influence in the greater Seattle and Portland area. The Raymond Avenue Crips were formed in the early 1970s on the west side by Marcus Sparks and Lavelle Flair. Their main sets are the 102s and the 120s. The Raymond Avenue Crips are also located in Pasadena, California, and some of the Raymonds went out to the Moreno Valley in Riverside County in the Inland Empire in the 1990s. The Raymonds usually get along with neighborhoods, East Coast, and Rolling O's. They often feud with Main Street Crips, Payback Crips, and Blood and Pyru sets. In 1979, Raymond was killed just short of his 27th birthday. Most sources I've spoke to say this was done by his fellow Crips, as Crip on Crip warfare skyrocketed. As my big brother Kenneth Bell, who was formerly employed with the LA County Sheriff's Department and has been a longtime school board member, many Black youth were kicked out of schools and the gang spread to new neighborhoods. Carrying a 22 and a 32 became very popular back in the day. Both Ken and I are of the opinion the best way to keep kids out of gangs is to give them a good education and positive opportunities and life skills to thrive in this world. In the early days, it should be noted that there were brothers in many families who were Crips and Bloods in the same household. That would have been an interesting discussion at the dinner table. Both Crips and Bloods usually knew each other as they went to elementary school together. Compton, aka Hub City, is located in the center of Los Angeles County, just southeast of downtown LA. In 1972, the Pyrus actually functioned with the Mona Park Crips and Zane Miller and the Carver Park Crips. But because of their conflict with Mac Thomas and the Compton Crips on Grand East, the Piru Boys eventually became rivals with all Crips in 1972. Other gangs that resisted the Crip invasion later became collectively known as Bloods by the late 1970s. According to his version of Crips history, A.C. Moses, aka King Babalui, was first a Crip. Then he switched over to the Pirus. This is now referred to as set jumping and frowned upon, but he states he was respected by both sides, and he is one of the best historians, in my opinion, on what occurred back in the early days. AC feels that there was no political conscience among Crips or Bloods, as some would try to rewrite history to fit their own agendas, as depicted in some documentaries and books. He says, nah, we were on some gangster shit. AC says there were only about 11 hardcore Pirus in the beginning, with around 22 supporters, but they soon acquired a big name on the streets for standing up to the Crips, and the Brims quickly became their allies. Per veteran gang cop Kenneth Bell, the Brims were very formidable back in the day. They started to confront the massive number of Crips and were always smaller, but a bit more organized than some of the other neighborhoods. The Brims were very deep, all around the LA Coliseum area, and they held their own, big time. Bloodstone Brims were around in the early 1970s also. The Brims are still active today around Harvard Park. Frederick Little Country Garrett was murdered by Crips at a party on June 5th, 1972, and his funeral was disrupted by Crips. This event was the final straw, with the Brims hating the Crips after that, as Little Country was very much loved by his friends. As veteran LAPD gang cop William Dunn notes, Brims were not Bloods yet. It was just Crips, Pirus, or Brims, etc. They were not yet aligned. LAPD made a gang map in 1972, and the only ones highlighted in red were the Pirus. KJFK was a big radio station, and they would talk about the Pirus warring with the Crips on the news by 1973. As gang warfare escalated, nearly all of the 1973 killings in Compton were Crips versus Pirus. Compton had its own police force at the time. The first set in Compton on Piru Street was started by Sylvester Puddin Scott, Vincent Owens, and others like original Compton Piru Lorenzo L.B., aka Low Benton, who was AC's close friend. Benton later became affiliated with the BGF in prison. Looters Park Boys also became Pirus in Compton, as well as the Family, the 151s, the Treetops, Fruit Drown, while Lime Hood and Elm Street Pirus came in later. Altogether in Compton, the Pirus controlled about a 5 square mile turf made up of various sets. Now, usually gangs with Piru in their name will claim ties to the original Pirus in Compton. Compton, as described by the Pirus, is often called Bompton with the C taken off. Bloods and Pirus will take anything with C off usually and change it to a P or B. Outside of Compton, if you're in a black gang but not a Crip, you're usually referred to as being a Blood today. Crips have always outnumbered Pirus and Bloods in LA, and in custody by at least a 3-to-1 margin. Soon the polarization among LA black youth became so strong that they were given an option: become Crip or die. Those who refused, the Compton Pirus and gangs outside Compton, like the Brims, Bishops, Bounty Hunters, Swans, and Stones, all joined together. The Treetop Pirus often don't get along with other Pirus, especially Fruit Top Pirus, or with local Chicano gangs like Tortilla Flats. Fruit Town Pirus are named after streets with fruit names, while Treetop Pirus are named after different types of trees. Elm Pirus are another big gang in Compton, and the Elms in Seattle, Washington have direct ties to Compton. I will talk more about that in a segment on Northwest gangs. The Bounty Hunters started on the east side of Watts in the Nickerson Gardens projects. There were some members of the Green Jackets that predated their reputation as Bloods, and many of them attended Centennial High School with Pirus. OG Frog from Bounty Hunters was out on the street from 1971 to 79 for the most part, except for a short stint at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall from December 1972 to March 1973. It was there that he met East Coast Crip Big Buster Shelton, who is still doing life today. OG Frog is very boisterous, as seen in his videos, but I admit he also has a lot of knowledge of gang history, especially when it comes to the Bounty Hunters. He was the original Bounty Hunter member in 1972, and like me, says that many gang books are not accurate about their history. His partner, OG Silly Blood, was considered the founder of the Bounty Hunters. Silly Blood was a jacket along with Ricky Brown, Joe Barker, James Miles, and Shaky. Tony Boyd was there also. They had no beef yet with the Crips. Inglewood family gangster bloods had 12 original members known as the Dirty Dozen, which included Sinbad, Cricket, and Pocket, who all hung out at Fifth Avenue Academy Movie Theater. Also often mentioned is Jan Brewer, Dirty Red, Tommy Akers, Sick Mick, and JR. Little Caesar from Inglewood was in Los Padrinos detention in 1973 and is talked about a lot in gang stories. OG Rowe is said to have come up with the family hand sign. Little Caesar said they wore red rags after Nasty Ed went to jail in 1974. It didn't mean you were blood, it didn't mean you're a Crip. Gang colors were not always distinct at that time, and gangbanging was nothing to glorify. As the Crips tried to take over many areas in South Central LA, Inglewood, and Compton, and other areas, Inglewood family gangster bloods would shoot at any Crips who invaded their hoods in Centennial Park, so they became known as gunslingers and would often go Crip hunting, looking for Crips to shoot. Today, Inglewood family still beefs with Imperial Village Crips and Tongan Crips. But like I said, Crips don't always get along with Crips, and Bloods don't always get along with Bloods. Inglewood family will also sometimes beef with neighborhood Pyrus, Queen Street Bloods, and Black P-Stones. Crenshaw Mafia was a spin-off gang of the Inglewood family in 1981. Their turf is located on the west side of Crenshaw Boulevard off Century in their neighborhood called The Bottoms. And 104th Street is their core location. I did a couple ride-alongs with Inglewood PD in past years in the main hoods, including The Bottoms, and I recall it being very run down and very grimy. Crenshaw Mafia also don't get along with Crips or 18th Street 106 Clique, which are active in Inglewood. Black P-Stones in Los Angeles didn't appear until the late 1960s via T. Rogers, who moved to LA from Chicago when he was 12 years old. In 1974, 16-year-old T. Rogers would often meet with his homeboys at his mom's house, located in Baldwin Village. One day, the Crips did a drive-by on it, and a 14-year-old Black P-Stone was hit in the head out by the street. From then on, it was war with the Crips, and Black P-Stones became Bloods. From 1972 to 1974, the number of gang-related murders more than doubled, from 32 to 70. One set of the Black P-Stones are called Jungle Stones, since much of their turf lies in the jungles, as depicted in the movie Training Day. This area has a lot of tightly packed apartments on streets with dead-end cul-de-sacs. My mother-in-law, who was a parole officer at the time, I remember her taking me out into the jungle. To be honest, I was scared. It was deep, and a lot of people were in red. But really, there was nothing to fear. They were more scared of her violating many people in the neighborhood. They were like, oh, yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. It was a trip. And luckily, I was safe as long as I was with her. Today, Black P-Stones are broken down to two main factions, the Jungles and the Biddy, which is closer to Mid-City. And like I said, they'll take the C off and put it with a B. That's why it's Biddy, not City. Black P-Stones get along with most other Bloods and Pyrus, but they beef hard against 18th Street and with Rollin' 30 and Rollin' 40's Crips. In September 2021, Black P-Stones founder T. Rogers died, and many Bloods and even some Crips, out of respect, attended his funeral. The Rolling 20 Bloods have been active since the 1970s. Terrell Local Right was one of their OGs and wrote a book called Home of the Body Bags. The Rolling 20s have been bitter rivals for many years, with Rolling 30's Harlem Crips to the south of them, as well as 18th Street located to the north. The Rolling 20s are allied with Black P-Stones, Fruittown Brims, and Outlaw Bloods. The neighborhood Pyrus were a spinoff of the Rolling 20s. The Denver Lane Bloods, aka the Lanes, are located in South Los Angeles near Imperial and Figueroa. They're among the oldest blood gangs in Los Angeles, having been around even before the Blood Alliance was established. Most sources say they were founded around 1970 as Denver Lane Boys, who lived next to another group called the Figueroa Boys, who were founded by the Miles family around the same time. They later went on to become Denver Lane Bloods and are broken down into various subsets. Peabody Cooper from Denver Lane Bloods became the founder of the United Blood Nation in the mid-1980s in the Los Angeles County Jail. I may do a more in-depth segment on non-BGF, non-Kumi Black prison gangs in the near future, but they are covered in my BGF book if you want to know more information right now. Other notable blood sets are Rolling 40s, Mad Swans, Athens Park, Miller Gangsters, and Neighborhood Family. The Pueblos and Bishops were separate gangs when Jimmy Lavender and his Bobby started the Bishops after their friend Skip was killed. The Pueblos came out of the Pueblo del Rio housing project around 53rd, while the Watts Bishops were another gang located around 92nd. After the Lavender brothers left the gang lifestyle, the Bishops and the Pueblos combined forces as the Pueblo Bishops in the Low Bottoms. Today, they have an alliance with Watts Bebop Bloods. But again, remember, not all Bloods and Pyrus get along in LA. For instance, Watts Bishops and Bloodstone Villains do beef sometimes. The Bishops are said to have encouraged Lime Hood to wear green. Lime Hood is located around Rosecrans to Compton Boulevard between Atlantic and Gibson Avenues. They took their name from Lime Street that runs through their hood, and they are bitter rivals of all Compton barrios as well as most Crips sets. While most Pyrus and Bloods sport red, this is not always the case, as it is with Lime Hood. At Dominguez High School, you have bounty hunters who originally flew blue rags, and Compton Bishops who flew gold rags 1975 to 1978. In their earlier days, the Outlaws actually wore blue bandanas in 1972, as did the Brims. And so blue and red colors associated today with Crips and Bloods was an evolution, as it has been with other trends that are constantly changing along with street politics. I would like to make it very clear that there are many great ongoing efforts in South Central, Compton, Inglewood, and in other parts of greater LA to stop gang violence. And there are many good people from these areas. Not all are gang members or drug dealers, but it should be recognized there has been a lot of underserved and neglected communities in the past. And as I've stated many times before, poverty and gangs go hand in hand. You can read more about my own efforts to help solve these issues in my new book, Ending Black and Brown Violence in America. I hope you enjoyed this quick overview. I hope to break it down further in the future, but this is just a basic primer. I encourage you to comment or contact me if you feel there was anything that was inaccurate or important left out. That's all. Until next time, this is Gabe Morales. Please stay safe.
God above. I like to thank God above. God above. I like to thank God above.